You're watching WRKM Channel 22, number one in the region. Tonight's WRKM broadcast for mature audiences only. It may not just be for the language this time. It may be for the very concepts we are about to talk about tonight. This man is a man you more than likely have never seen. He has a name you more than likely never heard. And I'm pretty sure you've never heard his voice. But there are very few people who are called the devil in life. And there's quite a few that live up to every aspect of it. Some would say he did that. He toppled governments in the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa. He had a wife and a mistress who would write letters to each other as pen pals to figure out how to make him happier. He was a man who had an affair with the Queen of Greece. You can see why he might have been a partial inspiration for James Bond. He is a man who said that the failure of the Bay of Pigs was the worst day of his life. He and his brother John Foster Dulles have not only dictated our foreign policy for the next 50 years, they believe that America itself was an enterprise to be run by the right men and not the everyday citizen. He was the longest running CIA chief, and he is tonight's subject for this year's Thanksgiving episode. He is Allen Dulles. It's Thanksgiving. Let's ruin some dinners. Let's have the conversations we can't have when the sun is up. Good evening. I'm Ralph A. Martinez, and this will end in darkness. It's amazing to me how, when I was a kid, I used to think about how the devil was God's favorite originally. He was one of the angels. He was one of our own, one would say. One of the good people or good beings in the world. But then he was corrupted by his own ambitions, his own beliefs of superiority. He thought he should be the one in charge. He believed that he knew what was right for everyone. And we do know those people in our everyday life. But very few ascend to the levels of one Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was born to Reverend Allen Macy Dulles, who by all accounts was kind of a sweetheart. Unlike his child, who was a real piece of shit, he wrote his books about spirituality, theology. He would take a good time with these books. He was very patient. He believed in service. His wife would go nuts when he wouldn't release a book on time. She'd be like, for the love of fucking God, someone's got to pay the bills around here. And it's right now, it's my rich parents. You gotta fucking just get these books done for the love of God. Not till they're done. And that's what it's like living with a writer. So I can kind of understand the resentment one Allen Dulles might have for his father. You know, he doesn't look at him as a man of action. He doesn't look at him as a man of finance, of power. He probably watched him give these beautiful, eulogies in church, these homilies, these beautiful speeches. And he probably went, well, that's a level of power, but I want more than just a congregation. It's small potatoes, really. for a person who really wants power, unless you get to like TD Jakes level. But I don't think there were anyone who was TD Jakes level at the time. I think there were probably a few that were on the radio nationally, and they had like advice, shows, stuff like that. But I don't think there were any stadium passes at the time. So Allen Macy had a little bit of a glass ceiling. It didn't help either that his stepfather was John Watson Dulles, who was the Secretary of State to President Harrison. John Watson Dulles is known for being the man who did the first American overthrow of a government in Hawaii. So they had a long, long tradition of service. How beautiful. They looked beyond themselves and said, we should do more. We should be part of the happenings going on. And it could have been because they were Calvinists, man. Calvinists are a weird bunch. Calvinists have a belief, let's talk like an adult, has a belief that good ideas must do combat with bad ideas. Good must, no matter what, beat evil. In a way, it's a little fatalistic, and some take it to its extreme, where they say, well, good must beat evil by any cost. I'm not entirely sure that's a full Calvinist view, but it's been heavily implied that the Dulles family were really, really into Calvinism. And there was a level of fatalism in it, where it was, if not us, then who will lead the New World Order? Who will take the country or the world or their flock, in terms of Reverend Allen Macy, to the next level? It had to be the Dulleses. They felt there was a moral responsibility. And it's kind of hard to beat the guys who feel like they have a moral responsibility. Because if they're doing what they feel is right, then they're almost not, they're definitely doing evil, but they're almost so blinded by their belief system, you almost can't fault them for doing what they do. You almost have to just go, well, I guess that's that. But in the case of the Dulles family, that could have been the case if it ended with Reverend Allen Macy. But it didn't end with Reverend Allen Macy. His sons, John Foster and Allen, decided that they looked at the world as something they needed to fix. And the problem with Allen, always, according to Eleanor, his sister, was he lacked an emotional empathy. He didn't really have much to give. For one instance, she tells a story about how their youngest sibling they were skipping rocks at the lake. She picked up a big one wanting to impress the boys, falls over the dock, and she starts to drown. Now, Allen by this time is a strong swimmer. He's probably the strongest of the bunch. But he doesn't jump in to save her. He's almost watching her, calculating the risk of, do I need to go down there? And if I go down there, will I even be able to save her? And Eleanor is screaming her lungs out to get some kind of help for their sister, and Alan's just staring. And eventually he comes to, and he starts yelling for his mom as well. She had been in the home, nursing a migraine because she was prone to them. So here she was trying to relax, leaving the older siblings in charge. And Alan showed a level of emotional displacement that he couldn't muster up to save his own sister. His children complained about his distance, for years. So did his wife, Clover. There's something in a guy like Allen Dulles who believes, I can make the hard decisions no one else can make. I do not carry the emotion into a decision. I am cold. I am calculated. I am by the numbers. And those are the men who tend to do well in government and do well in espionage. And he goes to Princeton, because he's a son of he's the grandson of a former Secretary of State, baby. So guess what? He's going to Princeton. And his brother John Foster goes as well. From Jump Street, these two knew what they had going on. John thought highly of Allen and always thought Allen was a genius, where John always felt a bit more like a mischievous cat. He knew what he was, he wasn't putting on the facade of anything other than a power-obsessed, greedy whore. Alan, on the other hand, wanted to dress it up. He made sure he was charming. He made sure he had the best suits. He was well liked in any room. He was funny. He legitimately was one of the inspirations for 007 because he knew Ian Fleming. And Ian Fleming had based 007 on a couple of guys he knew, during World War II. And this is when he really starts getting about it. Like the relationship between him and his like secretary Marion Ravencroft's like gross because like he would just rush into her room going, I need to clear my head. And clear my head meant I need to come. And when he was done coming, he'd be like, thanks, I needed that, and be right out the door. And Mary didn't see a problem with it for a very long time. Then when she even tried to stick up for herself, going, I will not be the person you come to just clear your head and just leave me there, Alan kind of didn't take that seriously and proceeded to still get what he wanted out of Mary. Clover, it was interesting because I think Clover reached out to Mary first, and because she knew what the situation was. And Clover was one of those wives back in the day of, my husband's a great man, he's doing something great, I cannot and will not get in the way. My job is to support. To the chagrin of her kids, by the way, who were never happy with that. But she does it, and her and Mary become these pen pals. And they're trading notes on how do we make Alan happy and how do we keep him happy. If Clover notices something at home is off, she will reach out to Mary going, look out for this. Like, he's feeling in this kind of mood. We got into this kind of fight. Mary would be like, well, here's what he's dealing at work. Be ready for this stress to come in. Well, his personal happiness was paramount to everything that happened in his life. And you can kind of see where it starts to show up, in his government work. After he graduates George Washington University, he's now in Sullivan and Cromwell, which is now a white shoe firm. They're a white shoe firm, known for business law. But back in the day, baby, they were the legal arm of the United States. If you were doing some shit the United States didn't like, they walked in going, hey, our client such and such will leave here if you continue doing what you're doing. And these guys, who worked at Sullivan and Cromwell would eventually become guys who work for the OSS, guys who would come to work for the future CIA. And because they had already a civilian knowledge of having to go to these other countries and telling these countries what's what, it made them the top guys for OSS service. And that's where Alan and John Foster cut their teeth. John Foster and Alan, I believe, become partners at Sullivan and Cromwell. And this is where he gets his kind of license to travel. He starts to, get involved in World War II. And he becomes kind of a thorn to FDR's side, because FDR knows this guy's a little weird. He met him very early on. FDR always got a bad feeling about this guy, and he knew that he was in Switzerland doing his little shenanigans. And he would always try to check on Alan, but Alan would always have some kind of convenient cover story. Alan was very disposable about people. Everyone knew that. FDR knew that. There's a story where Alan had a young lady who was a source for him, and they had an affair. And then the next morning, he brought her to the British Secret Service, and she was never seen from again. Information and pleasure. That's kind of where Alan operates from. And listen, so do pimps. They operate from an information and pleasure kind of mode, And who can fault them? You get resources out of it. Alan Dulles knew how to pimp, and that's what made him successful. He was one of the very few white men who could pimp. Maybe that's why he's a legend. I don't know. Bobby, you better start drinking up, all right? Because this is going to get worse. And we're going to start dishing some CIA shit. And we're probably going to get shot by the end of this episode. So Drink it up, buddy. Drink it up. Both Dulles brothers had the belief that, in post-World War II, you really couldn't get rid of the Nazis because the trains couldn't run on time without them. He would write several memos going, it'd be foolish for us to take some of these people over to the United States or to keep some of them in power because without them, the trains don't run on time. People don't know what they're doing. There are no infrastructure. If we get rid of all of them, it's going to be a heavier cleanup. FDR had said there would be no conditional surrenders in World War II. He didn't want anyone getting a deal. Operation Paperclip that we do know of, that helped Nazis form NASA on our side and brought in a lot more scientists and such. It wasn't done under his nose, but it was kind of done behind his back. He didn't know the full details on it. He thought they were bringing back better Nazis or the least terrible Nazis. But no, we were bringing the worst because they did all the cool scientific shit that, murdered millions of people, but eventually got us to the moon. At least Operation Paperclip had some kind of authority. Allen didn't have that when he was bringing Nazis over to America. He was doing it behind FDR's back. In fact, FDR told him, don't you do that. Stop that. I don't want you doing it. Please don't do it. I'm telling you not to do it. Why are you still doing it? Stop. Don't do it. Don't do it. Allen kept doing it. So one would argue he committed treason. And he was committing treason for a good long time, because that's what you do, okay? Maybe you commit a little treason from time to time. I don't know. Maybe I'm being hard on him. Maybe committing treason's for the better sometimes. Do I sound like someone who was at January 6th? I'm a little concerned. Allen saw the best in people, or the most valuable things in people. That's kind of nice guy he was. Particularly with Karl Wolff, one of the worst Nazis. He made sure he got across to the United States, but the one thing Allen knew to do was take their fortune, make them give you a nice sum of money so you can fund future OSS missions. Now, here's a level of quandary, right? If there is a positive benefit to bringing a Nazi into the country, his fortune being used to fund OSS operations to stop the Nazis, is there something in that that's at least, what would be the word, moral? Once again, Calvinism. He believes, yes, these are terrible, deplorable people, but at the same time, I could use their finances to fund the good fight. This is the trade-offs we always talk about on this show when we talk about the leaders who really run this country, the businessmen, these special interests. These are the people we kind of talk about. It's not like the super Illuminati. It's really just a couple of guys in a couple of areas that just know what they're doing. But the thing is, I would normally say maybe he was operating on a high Calvinistic belief, but him and his brother just seem to have a thing about Jews. That's a well-known fact. Eleanor married a Jewish man, and John Foster wrote her a letter going, if you marry this man, me and Allen aren't going to be happy. And they almost were super happy when, during World War II, he committed suicide due to the stress of having to run from the Nazis. And Allen Dulles, he had his own little thing. There was a British journalist who came to him and told him, hey, dude, I don't know if you know this, but I know you're OSS, you're doing some secret stuff. But these Germans, they're killing Jewish people. They're committing a Holocaust out here, and it's kind of bad. It's bad. People shouldn't be doing it. It's millions. It's millions of people, and it's not even like just Jews either. Like it's like gypsies, it's gays, it's the foreign people. Like they're going pretty nuts here, Allen. And Allen was so shocked to hear that. So shocked. He had not heard anything like that, except for 2 weeks before that meeting from another person who told him it was happening. And then he decided it might be a good time to tell some people across the pond. Now, it's not to say the Holocaust would have stopped or we would have found out about it early enough if Allen Dulles had done something, but you never really know, now do ya? But Allen saw that as something not necessarily to report back, because probably he was anti-Semitic. Probably, allegedly, respectfully, Honestly, we don't know. I am assuming. But do I sound wrong right now? Do I sound wrong? This is the man who would become the future director of the CIA. This is the man we will be talking about the rest of the evening. This is just to give you a little background of who this man is before we get into the main, points, the main events of his tenure that changed our country to what it is today. When we come back with this one in darkness, 3 countries go toe to toe with one man and one organization, and they don't have a chance. More when darkness comes back. The following broadcast is sponsored by Skull Crusher's Whiskey. That's why I've been drinking the entire time, knowing that at the end, the CIA might blow our fucking brains out. And it's a good whiskey for that kind of thing. Just when I want to think about the American deep state, how horrible things could be if they were fully in control, which they someday will be. UFOs, Bohemian Grove, all the things that go bump in the night and have a potential to destroy us. What's the perfect whiskey to forget about those things with? It's Skull Crusher Whiskey. Yeah, it's a good whiskey for when your family meets a young agent in his heyday, bouncing around different countries in World War II. You only meet him once. You take care of him because, he's a freedom fighter like yourself. You only met him once. But then years later, he tells the Soviets you're a spy. Or he leaks to the Soviets you might be a spy. And then the Soviets lose their shit thinking you are a spy. And he only used you so he can cause trouble within the KGB. So they would go on a mass killing spree thinking there was a mole. And your family is tortured. And you're tortured. And it's okay, though, because you have Skull Crusher Whiskey. And no matter how much they beat you, they cannot beat out the sensation you have when you're drinking Skull Crusher Whiskey. They're overthrowing governments, Bobby. The Dulles Imperium is made of 3 government coups. A hat trick, if you will, that happened under the Allen Dulles administration of the CIA. We will go through each briefly and individually so you can get a full scope of what this man's career was. Let's start with Iran, and it's so far away. Muhammad, I'm sorry, I popped myself a little bit with that one. I popped myself more than I thought. Mohammad Mossadegh, Bobby Mossadegh. You're supposed to catch those things, but I'm catching them for you. Mossadegh was a newly elected prime minister of Iran, progressive, and he had one simple philosophy. What belonged to Iranians should be given to Iranians. But that's not how colonization works, and I don't know if anyone explained to him how colonization works. The British and the Americans didn't see it that way. The Anglo-Iranian company was in control of all the oil of Iran. And the Iranians weren't getting necessarily a sweet cut, and not the spicy little nibble. They weren't getting the good stuff. But the British were, and they were getting the oil. The problem with that is, and I think anyone would agree, is if you're producing the stuff, should you not get the bigger cut? Should they not pay more for the luxury of having an oil-rich country like Iran go, you can have a little bit of ours. I mean, the Saudi Arabian royal family does that. Right now, Joe Biden's bent over a fucking barrel getting fucked by them every chance they get because they're like, hey, you need oil, we got it, bam, 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 pay for this, dog, pay it at this rate. That's why you're paying for so much at the gas pump. Do you see how we tie in history to the present? That's why people listen to this show, dude. I'm really convinced people listen to this show because we make the connections. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm overcompensating what we do here, but hey, if you don't believe in yourself, who's gonna? But Mossadegh believed in himself. He believed in the Iranian people. So he went over to them very humbly going, hey, Anglo-Iranian company, can we please renegotiate this deal? And what do you think happened? The same thing that happens when you renegotiate. And what did you think happened? The same thing that happens when you renegotiate with your boss. They said, fuck off. And to be fair, the Iranians kind of had to fuck off a little bit because they didn't have the military the British had or the Americans had. But Mossadegh was not the fuck off type. And that's what I respect. We don't talk about this enough, not being the fuck off type. Many people are fine with being the fuck off type. They're very comfortable with going, well, I was told no. I guess I'll just continue being a fucking loser, but not Mossadegh. And that's what I respect. Me and him got something in common. We refuse to lose, even though it will someday cost us our lives. Mossadegh says, well, fuck it. Since you're going to do that, I'll just nationalize the company and take the money that's owed to me, bitch. And you gotta respect that level of gangster, right? And not gangster in the traditional sense of criminality. Gangster ass confidence. He looked at them and said, fuck off. I'm taking back what's ours. And that's not a bad thing to do. Should a country not own its own resources? Should a country not benefit from its own resources? Now, some people say, well, what about the people who will be in the UK? And they would be, cold during the winter. Move. That's the way I look at it. You're living in the fucking United Kingdom. That place seems boring as shit. It seems kind of miserable if you ask me. I've never seen anyone tell me they lived in the UK and they were happy about it. They don't even have a cuisine, those people. But the Iranians have a cuisine. So to me, if you are the better culture, you should automatically get access to your resources. That's going to be a tricky word for me tonight, it seems. So what happens? Well, what Mossadegh didn't realize was he pissed off the Americans in a way, because he pissed off the one law firm you didn't want to piss off at this time. Want to take a guess which one? Spoiler alert, Alan Dulles used to work for them. Sullivan and Cromwell, baby. Bam, bam, bam. I like going bam, bam, bam. It makes me feel like I'm tough. And I have a shirt and tie on, so I feel like I'm ordering a hit, just like Alan Dulles used to. But so Mossadegh had pissed off Sullivan and Cromwell, which is something you didn't want to do back then. So who did they call? They called their boy Alan. Alan, this guy's being a fucking ball buster. It's kind of fucking ridiculous. Like, he's not letting us cheat him out of money. He's not letting us exploit Iran. It's kind of ridiculous, right? Like, what group of brown people, how dare they ask for things that belong to them? These foolish fucks. And Alan said, don't worry, I'll take care of these foolish fucks. And he did. But he knew one thing. The Shah of Iran had been a bit unpopular at the time. People were not fuck with him because there's a thing that happens, I think, when you become a Saudi Arabian royal, or let's just say Arabia royal. They seem to really enjoy human rights violations, and people really take a real hard stance on torturing, killing whoever you want, and robbing from the poor, which certainly a take, but I mean, I can say that here in America. I couldn't say that there. So maybe I'm a hypocrite because I wouldn't be saying any of this over there. But the thing is, they have a long-reaching arm, so maybe they could take me out from over there while I'm over here. You never know. So if I don't show up next episode, it's a good chance I've been killed by some government officials. Find my body, avenge me. But in this particular situation, or this overthrow, they looked at the Shah of Iran and he was not feeling too good. People didn't like him, so he didn't need that negative energy. He went to Rome with his beautiful wife. And that's what you do when you're taking shit from people. You gotta remind the wife you still got money. I can still take you to Rome whenever I want. That helps keep her around. You know, when you're a Shah wife, you're gonna want some nice vacations, nice houses. Have you ever seen the show Shah Sunset? My mom watches that show. I've only seen one episode, but they seem very rich. So he's off in Rome moping about not being liked. Alan Dulles said, well, if we're going to get this thing back on track, we got to get the Shah on board. I'm going to have to lift his spirits. And he lifted his spirits by checking into the same hotel as him in Rome and pulling to his side going, you got to go back. I have to go back. Yeah, you got to go back. because this guy's making things really difficult for people we're friends with. Oh, I don't know if I should go back. They don't really like me over there. Why wouldn't they like you? There's some things I've done you might have heard about in your intelligence, reports. Are you kidding me? I don't care about that. I was friends with legitimate Nazis, Karl Wolf. And I think we can turn this all around. You just need better PR, baby. We just got to give you what we call the push. The push? The push. I don't know how we say it in Iranian, but we're going to give you the push. I'll believe it when I see it. And boy, did he believe it when he saw it. The only way to stop Mossadegh was to tear him down. So they did the usual stuff. This guy's corrupt. He's possibly a commie. But they went with a third one, which in the Muslim world carries a lot of weight. He's a homosexual. And holy fuck, did they really hammer on that one. They were like, do you really want a gay running all of this? You don't want a queer prime minister. And to be honest with you, I kind of want a gay president, because I feel like at least my president will know how to dress, will know how to eat dinner properly and what forks are which. I don't know any of that. I do want a president that feels more official, more glamorous, if you will. We need to bring back glamorous politicians. Were they ever in style? I don't think Obama was glamorous. He was certainly handsome. Michelle was glamorous. She was something else. Ooh. It's getting a little hot in here. So what did they do? It was very simple. Allen Dulles had learned from his grandpappy that you can overthrow any government you want. Hell, his daddy did it to Hawaii. So now he was in the family business. They found General Zeddy. General Zeddy, real piece of shit. Real friend of the Shah. Some would say they did some of that human rights violation stuff together. They had a lot of fun. And when you're in a tough spot, who do you turn to? You turn to your buddy. You turn to the guy who's got just as much dirt on you as, well, you have on yourself. You call in some favors. Allen Dulles loved seeing the best in people, the high value in people, even torturers and murderers. So he calls in General Zeddy and says, hey, Zeddy, do you want to fucking do a revolution? He's like, I do want to do a revolution. I've got nothing else going on. Then let's get to work. So you got the PR campaign, you got your new guy you're giving up the bigs to, you're giving him victories here and there, you're putting him over. He's on the road to WrestleMania. He's going to be the fucking champion by the end of it, baby. And soon, you gotta start putting over the Shah. So they start putting out really good articles about the Shah. The New York Times even does it. So does the Washington Post, those fucks. So now the Shah's got a positive push. And what's funny is, he worked himself into a shoot. He thought the people of Iran really wanted him back. And can you blame him? The CIA knows how to do propaganda. They learned it from the Nazis, who was friends with Allen Dulles. There we go. We're putting it all together, aren't we? So eventually, Mossadegh's out. They get him out of there, and they decide, well, this guy's got to fucking go. We can't keep him around. The longer he's alive, the more powerful he becomes. You're going to find that this is kind of a threat. But the thing about it is, they knew if we kill this dude, we'd make him into a martyr. And they weren't into that shit. But indirectly, he ended up becoming one for Iran for years. So at 84, he died. But to not honor him, because they didn't really want him to have a place where people can go and gather and paid tribute and remember him fondly, they buried him in his living room. That's how it is, even though he wanted to be buried in a public cemetery. But what did we learn here? Number one, don't ask for your resources. Number two, never ask for your resources. Number three, don't fucking ask for your resources. And Allen was really scared that maybe they'll go to the Russians because the Russians might give them their resources. But there was no evidence to prove that he was ever on the verge of communism other than doing what seems to be an un-American thing, asking for your resources, asking for what you're owed. Did not know that was un-American. But that's how, we can look at it now with modern research. Watch this newsreel where they detail it very, very differently, baby.
Attention is focused once again on the Middle East, where events in Iran have taken a dramatic double twist. Forced to flee his palace in Tehran, the Shah and his queen arrive in Rome after an alleged attempt by the Imperial Guard to arrest Dr. Mossadegh and a refusal by the Shah to dissolve Parliament at Mossadegh's request. In Tehran, it looked as if Mossadegh would soon be named president, and on his orders, troops occupied the Shah's palaces and surrounded Parliament. And then the people themselves took a hand.
They were tight.
300 killed and hundreds wounded is a conservative estimate. The rioters freed those taken prisoner earlier and stormed the house of Mossadegh. Foreign Minister Fatimi gets through. First reports that he was torn to pieces had not been confirmed. Meanwhile, the mob flocked the streets demanding the return of the Shah. Mossadegh and his government were swept from power in favor of General Zahedi, the man appointed by the Shah in the first place. The thoughts of Britain instinctively turned to Abadan, that monument to British enterprise and engineering skill. Forced to abandon what we had created in the wilderness, is it too much to hope that we shall see once more the tankers of Britain at Abadan? Maybe sanity will yet prevail, and Iran and Britain go forward in harmony.
Apologies for the chime. Bobby doesn't know how to turn off his phone. Anyway, what was interesting is the newsreel was able to fit in a portion where we don't know about the reports of where he was torn apart. You can tell that was when CIA agents just jerking off, like, oh, imagine he gets torn apart. Oh. But that was the overthrow of Iran. Number 2, Guatemala. I'm going to have a hard time saying Guatemala and Guatemalan without flubbing. So let's start a counter, starting now. Our boy. Well, I don't know if he's my boy. I don't want to be associated. If I don't, could get assassinated. Jacobo Arbenz. Did I say Jacobo right? Is that how you say Jacobo? Is it Jacobo? Jacobo Arbenz. He was part Swedish, I believe. He is what he is. But he was a guy who came with some cash. Him and his wife, they used to call the socialist sorceress because she was always passing him books about progressive ideas. Heavens forbid a wife asks her husband to read. And he had to have been the best husband because he actually read the shit that she suggested. You know how many women are like in love with this guy right now that I've said that? All of them. So please read about him. You might fall in love with him a little deeper. I know I certainly did. He wasn't my kind of handsome, but he does have a weird Elon Muskian kind of look. Maybe it's a mixed thing. When you mix with European people, they all look like Elon Musk. But our Benz also made the one mistake. Oops. Someone else did it again. He was asking for his resources. He was also a democratically elected president of Guatemala. So far, no Guatemala mistakes, but I've only said it twice. So you can see I'm kind of avoiding it. I am smart. But he too was asking for his resources, this time from a little company called United Fruit. Do you know where the term Banana Republic comes from? It comes from countries under the thumb of Banana Republic. No, but is the clothing store technically a CIA front? I'm just asking questions. But O. Henry, a popular American writer, had coined the term Banana Republic for countries that were under the thumb of one United Fruit. And Guatemala was a place under the thumb of United Fruit. They owned about 70% of the land. The telephone lines were theirs. The subways. This is Guatemala. The railroads were theirs. They kind of had control of the entire country, and they treated the government kind of like The Sims. We put them where we want. We build the house bigger if we want, or smaller. Depends on how we're feeling, as long as they don't ask about the fucking resources. And he asked about the resources. And the problem with that is, as we learned with Mossadegh, no one likes when you ask about the resources. But here's the thing about that, and I have a theory about why a situation like Guatemala is so terrible. I think it's beyond the fact that it's just Guatemala, it affects us as well. There is a level of every fruit is always in season at all times. And I think because of that, Central American countries have been kind of pillaged for their resource of all year round sun, all year round fruit. If we just ate things when they were in season, maybe things like this wouldn't happen. Maybe United Fruit wouldn't have had the monopoly it had in the fruit industry, or is it produce? Produce, fruit, whatever. Where's my money? At the end of the day, or at the end, no, but maybe they wouldn't have had a monopoly on all these countries and forced them to do things the way they wanted them to do. So our Benz comes up with a radical idea. He doesn't nationalize United Fruit. He ain't got power like that. But what he does say is, we're going to get the land and redistribute it. And that's not fun for United Fruit, who owns 70% of the land. Now, you look into his ideology, people say he wasn't that far off from capitalism. He just believed that if you're going to modernize Guatemala, the way most of them believe you're going to modernize Iran, it should be with your own money. You don't want foreign money. Foreign money comes with strings. It comes with attachments. Look at Africa right now. They're doing all these zero interest loans with China, but you think China's not sitting there looking for the deposits that have the minerals to build computer chips which they're highly good at? That's the whole point. They're not interested in developing Africa. They too want to get into the colonial business because they didn't really get to have their colonial time. Maybe that's what China's really upset about. They never got to be colonists the way the whites got to. And I think deep down, everyone kind of wants to be the one in power for a little bit. So maybe this is China's time to start getting some colonies in Africa. World history is only built on resources. If you look at it from a macro perspective, it's all about resources all the time. And in Guatemala, that's what it was about. The United Fruit Company, guess what? They have a law firm. And this law firm don't take kindly to this shit. They don't. They don't like people redistributing stuff that their clients own through shady capitalistic ways, through shady corporate maneuvers. If their clients do it, it's legal as far as they're concerned. Can you guess which law firm? Do you want to guess which law firm? Do you want to play the game with me? It sounds a lot like Sullivan and Cromwell. Yes. They also represented United Fruit. So who do you think they called? Alan Dulles. And Alan was so happy to get the call because, truthfully speaking, he had just finished doing the Iranian overthrow and he was kind of bored. He needed a new project. You don't want to, when you do a hot album or a hot mixtape, you want to follow it up with something fire. Maybe not too soon, but Alan waited about a year, He was like, okay, I can get into it. It's been a year. I'm let the streets know I'm back. And he let the streets know he's back. So they start with the same old. They do the propaganda campaign. This guy's a communist. He's fucking killing people. They don't go with homosexual. And I think it's because our Benz had a smoking hot wife from what I hear. I never looked at the pictures because I like to treat people in these situations like ghosts of the past. So I can only focus on their actions. Then I go back and take a look at them. But if what I'm reading's right, his wife was foreign. And you're not going to pull that shit off with him. All right? Like, there's women who are beards for gay dudes, but none of them are ever smoking hot. I've never seen a smoking hot beard. That's just me. Throwing it out there, just saying. If you are a smoking hot beard that's married to a gay man, send in your photo. And we will judge it on This One in Darkness. We should have a contest. Maybe that's a bit, sexist a bit. We're judging hotness. But if you're a hot beard, how rare is that? Bobby, you better start drinking this whiskey, dog. Because when the CIA busts through the door and kill us both, you're going to want this. It will take the pain away. And it's a good thing we're drinking, because you know who drank a lot? Our Benz. Our Benz had a drinking problem. It was well known, but he had done everything he could to fight it. And he was doing pretty good. From all accounts, he was pretty sober. Wasn't fully sober, but he was doing all right. He wasn't, out there doing what the Shah was doing. He wasn't partying. He was really a man of the people. And that's a problem. But it's always weird in South American overthrows, because you never really hear about a general they find. They always find some colonel, because the colonel, I think, is easier to bribe because he was on the lowest rank. They don't have too many demands. The fact that they're getting the push in general makes them happy. They're just happy to be part of the team. They're just happy to be there. And our boy, Castillo Armas, was really happy to be there. Because where he was working in a furniture store in Honduras. Working in a furniture store, already tough. Working in a furniture store in Honduras, yikes. That's a bit more inventories coming across the water as opposed to a truck, which I feel land might be a little faster because of railroads. So maybe you're up more on a trend and you can sell more. I don't know what the furniture market is in Honduras. There certainly are no rent centers there, I would believe. Is that elitist? Am I being a Dulles right now? Am I being a Dulles? Bobby, you tell me if I was being a Dulles, right? Okay. I don't want to be a Dulles. I'm a good guy, dude. I'm like talking about this stuff. I'm shining a light on oppression. And I'm wearing a shirt and tie. You didn't compliment me on my tie. I tied it myself. Bobby, what did I tell you about the goddamn phone? But if you are a good-looking beard, please reach out to us. We would like to know, do you exist? A hot smoking beard, man, because they're really holding the government's secrets. So our Benz have been in a situation where the CIA, they kind of play both sides. They go, hey, man, these people are trash. We appreciate you. We're into freedom and shit like that, kind of, sort of. We don't confirm. But we talk to Mexico, they'll hold you. Yeah, we got a plane for you. Sweet, meet us at the airport. Sounds good. Hey, before I go, can I, give a speech? And just transmit that? Yeah, you can try, but you're not going to be able to. It's a fly. Oh, shit, man. That's how they're going to get us. It's a fly in the studio, bro. That's how the CIA is going to get us. They got bioengineered assassins. But serious business. They say, sure, you can give a speech, but odds are people won't hear it. But go ahead. Give it your best shot. Knock yourself out. We're not in any way going to stop you. We've already done that. So he does give a final address that most Guatemalans don't hear. But what the Guatemalans do remember is when he arrives to the airport, in front of press and his fellow people, they make him strip down to his underwear before he gets on the plane, because they don't want him bringing around any cash with him. They don't want him to have money to start a new life that in the CIA's mind is the Guatemalans' money. But they can't have fruit, can't have land, but don't you steal their money. Though we've already been doing that. Don't you steal government documents showing how you were not really a communist and kind of a cool guy. Don't do that now. All right? And he strips down to his underwear, and there's pictures of this shit. We won't be posting them. I will not do that to our Benz. He was a good man trying to do something right in a very corrupt place, in a very corrupt part of the country or the world, with the CIA down his back. Now you would think, okay, they exile him to Mexico. That's not bad. It's beautiful sun. It's beautiful landscapes. Maybe he can start a whole new life there. Well, they told the Mexicans, don't make him feel, welcome now. So the Mexicans kind of pressure him to leave. He goes to Switzerland, home of his father. CIA tells Switzerland, hey, don't you make him feel welcome now. And they also pressure him to leave. He goes to Paris and they go, hey, France, hey, CIA here. Don't you make him feel welcomed. No problem, man. They pressure him to leave as well. Eventually, they settle on just letting him stay in Mexico, because what's the harm in it? You know? We've already demoralized him enough. But he was always on the CIA hit list for quite some time. They always wanted to get a shot at him. And some say he did. He died at 55 in Mexico City when, sadly, he was back on his old drinking problem, maybe due to the PTSD of having to jump from country to country and being overthrown by the CIA. That might have something to do with it. But he jumped into a scalding hot bathtub. And I hate to break it to you, but when you're drunk, you know scalding hot. You know? You're drunk, but you kind of know what scalding hot feels like. Little sus. Very sus. But we make no accusations here. We just make inferences. Allegedly's. Little funs that the CIA definitely took him out in the end. By this time, people were talking to Eisenhower like, you know, Alan's a really cool guy. You know, he throws some cool parties. You know, he's banging his secretary. His secretary and his wife are pen pals. And they're still, you know, trying to figure out how to make him happy. He seems charming enough, you know. I can grab a beer with this guy, have a cigar, talk about books and stuff. He seems kind of all right, but don't you think he's getting a little crazy with the overthrowing of governments? You know, don't you think it's a little odd? And Ike, you know, really turned a blind eye to it because Ike really thought, well, you know, maybe it takes a strange genius to do stuff like this. Maybe you need to be that weird to run a place like the CIA. But by that time, the Dulles already had their fingers in them. You know, their hands fully up his ass, playing him like a puppet. Nikita Khrushchev, Russian leader, he noticed one time at a conference, Ike was listening. Not aloof, but he was listening, but not really listening. Kind of half aloof, half like waiting for instructions. And when a decision had to be made, John Foster Dulles was there to slide him a paper going, you're going to say this, and this is what we're doing. Okay, John. And he would say it like a fucking puppet. So now, Alan's got 2 rings, 2 successful campaigns under his belt. He didn't get it the way he thought he'd get it. He would prefer to have hit the homosexual thing a bit more, but that R-Benz and his smoking hot beard, or his smoking hot wife. Once again, smoking hot beards, reach out to us. TWEID show on Twitter. This will end in darkness on Instagram. We need to know if there are hot beards. But Alan knew he needed one more for the hat trick. And before we get into the hat trick, let's take a stroll down propaganda memory lane with this newsreel.
Peace comes to Guatemala. For the first time in 10 years, the people of Guatemala are breathing the sweet air of liberty. Only days after the resignation of Red President Jacobo Arbenz, rebel leader Castillo Armas sweeps into town. Thousands of communists and fellow travelers are rounded up in makeshift prisons.
He murdered all of them, Castillo.
For United Fruit, it's business as usual,
of course it
as
is.
all company land seized by the communists is returned. On television, Secretary of State Dulles announces the return of democracy to Guatemala.
The future of Guatemala lies at the disposal of the Guatemalan people themselves. It lies also at the disposal of leaders loyal to Guatemala who have not treasonably become the agents of an alien despotism which sought to use Guatemala for its own evil ends. The events of recent months and days add a new and glorious chapter to the already great tradition of the American states.
Since then, or since at least till the 80s, there were like 6 other guys in charge of that country after Armas. So I guess the overthrow didn't take. Number 3 in the dullest imperium might be the most depressing one, really. You have to understand that the nation of Africa never really saw too many great leaders. Leaders that could actually change the foundation in which business was done there. In the Congo, there was a simple man named Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba was a democratic elected leader of the Congo right after they kicked the Belgians the fuck out of there, which they should. Belgian waffles are a little bit overrated, as far as I'm concerned. Belgian chocolate, hit or miss, depending on who you buy it from. But also horrible colonizers. And Patrice really looked at his time there as a way of showing the world what the black man can do when working in liberty. And he wanted it to be the crown jewel of Africa, this democratically elected country. And spoiler alert, we're not going to have any newsreels on it because this kind of cover up or this kind of overthrow doesn't really get covered as much. It gets thrown into all the rest of the African overthrows that the CIA has done. But this one to me particularly stands out because this one had the most promise, or at least a leader you could really believe in. This guy had Bill Clinton, Barack Obama electability. This guy was able to speak and make you believe in his words. And when he spoke to you, you felt like he was only speaking to you. He had that kind of electrifying power. And I also think he's just a smooth dude. He looks like a real smooth dude. Like, I feel like the entire time he's just like, listen, girl, you want to get free? You want to take care of our own resources? Why do I give it to everybody else? It's our resources. It's just me and you, boo. It's just me, you, and this metal we producing. And let's be honest. Why do I give it to them? Fuck them. Just me and you. Let me light a candle. Let me show you what I mean by freedom. And boy, did he. And it was impossible not to fall for that guy. It's impossible. He had too much charisma. He had a smooth look. And he was highly educated. This was a guy who was invested in something. This is a guy who was invested in something bigger than what he already had. Because the Congo at this time was going through kind of a separation with the state of Katanga. And he was trying to keep them together. And he reached out to the U.S. going, well, they believe in freedom. They believe in keeping things together. They fought a war about it. So let's see if they'll get into it. They weren't into it. Well, we did get into it when he went over to the Ruskies. And he was like, hey, do you guys want to help? And they went, well, we'll try, but we promise nothing. And ultimately, Katanga still chose to be a separate state on its own. But once again, in his mind, he saw a united Africa. He saw an Africa that could be modernized if it took control of its own resources. And what have we learned about taking control of your own resources? No one wants you to do that. Stop it. Stop it now. The American Metal Company wasn't going to stand for this shit. So they called their lawyers. Can you guess who represented them? Let's say it together in a joint disappointment. Sullivan and Cromwell. Yes, the same people that represented United Fruit, the same people that represented the Anglo-Iranian oil company, also represented the American Metal Company. And as you can guess, who did they call when they were upset? Allen Dulles. And Allen, you know, he's coming off 2 coups. The last one was a bit easier than the first. So he's like, all right, I can do this. This one won't be too difficult. This guy thinks he's good, but I'm Allen Dulles. And I'm going to let him know how I get down. He was out there in the streets, man. He let the streets know he was back. He waited a bit, but he was back again with a trifecta, the end to his trilogy. So what did he do? This time he went, I'm thinking about the future. Let's put somebody new over. Let's get as a 28-year-old colonel. And they did. We're not going to name him here because fuck that guy, sellout. So eventually our boy Lumumba ends up in house arrest. But Patrice is smooth. So he talked his way out of that house arrest, if you know what I mean. Listen, you really gonna lock me up like this? You think they're gonna care about you when this is over? They're gonna take shit from you too. They're gonna take shit from everybody. It's our medal. It's our country. You really gonna let these white people put your own countrymen in jail? You gonna be that guy? You don't wanna be that guy. Let me out. Let me out. Come on. You know you want to. And I promise, when I'm out, I'm out. And I'm going to hook this whole thing up and we're going to get back on track. You just got to believe me, baby. You just got to believe. And man, did they believe, because he escaped house arrest. And everywhere he went, every town he went to, they were like, please talk to us, give us a speech. And he's like, yeah, I gotta relax, because those talk downs don't work all the time. Like, I gotta hold on to some for myself. I gotta hold on to some for at home too, because the wife she's gonna want me to do a talk down from time to time. You know? You always gotta save some for home. Can't just be giving out the talent everywhere. I save some jokes for home, some dumb bits. Remember, never take for granted the territories you're already over in. You know, you could very easily be not over. You can get buried very quickly. That's how those things work. But anyway, Lumumba is on the run and he gets to the small village of Lodi. But across the river, he sees Stanleyville, and Stanleyville loves Patrice. And he knows if he gets there, he can lay low for a while and mount his resistance. So he's got a little entourage with him, former government officials that used to rock with him. He's got his wife and his toddler. They're about to make this happen. So he goes on the first boat just to make sure everything's cool in Stanleyville, come back for the wife and kid. But as he gets there, the military that had been dealing with the roadblocks that villagers were putting up to protect Patrice have finally arrived. And they've now captured his wife and toddler. His crew's like, don't go back. If you go back, it's over. If you go back, it's done. Everything we fought for, the future of Africa, all of it, it's done, man. You can't. And we understand it's your wife and kid. But this is so much bigger. There's something big happening here. But Patrice, he knows one very simple rule, and he tells this to his people. When one chooses to struggle for his country, one must accept it will end in tragedy. And he goes back. And then they proceed to beat him in front of his wife. And they beat his toddler as well. And then the CIA is like, all right, we're going to arrest him, but it ain't going to work if he's still alive. He's going to mean too much. We got to get rid of this dude. We got to get him out of here. Send him away to the annals of history. So, one of the Belgians they know, and the Belgian government goes, well, you can take him to the state of Katanga because they don't really fuck with him over there. And there'll be a farmhouse waiting. And you can have your way with him. Which they did. They beat the shit out of him. They tortured him. All that was left of him in the end was a tooth that they gave his family in the 2000s. And it's interesting how, if you really look at this story, it's kind of Wakanda forever. Vibranium, metal in the Congo. Maybe Stanley knew about Alan Dulles. Maybe Stanley was trying to put us onto some game. I have long suspected Stanley's a bit smarter than people give him credit for. The Mole Man represents a bunch of homeless in New York, and he clearly despised them, allegedly. Tossing that out there. But with the people of the Congo, he empathized, and he also hated Alan Dulles. So my theory is that's what he based it on. It seems a bit too close, doesn't it? But it's kind of sad in that way, where you can find the parallels in modern pop culture and actual history and go, well, nothing much has changed in that respect. And that's why I feel Lumumba should be known as much as Malcolm X, as much as Martin Luther King, because I feel like what he meant was far greater than I think he's given credit for. He represented a hope of what could be, and sadly never got to be. Mandela eventually came out, and he did his thing. But I think Patrice had a grander vision. And we'll never know what he would have accomplished with that grander vision. Dulles got his third ring, his trifecta. But some war horses don't know when it's over. Eisenhower kind of knew it was over. Well, mainly because his term was coming to an end. And it was time for him to go. But in the end, he realized that Allen had only left him with a legacy of ashes. And he confronted Allen about this. He told him this. You left me nothing but a legacy of ashes. That's how I will be remembered. It's kind of like that moment in Gladiator where Marcus Aurelius is talking to Maximus, and he goes, how will I be remembered? The philosopher? The tyrant? But what Eisenhower is really remembered for, and I always felt a little mixed baggy on this, not so much as a general, but for the speech he gave towards the end. After he had already okayed these overthrows, he finally gives a speech telling the truth. And in the end, we give him more credit for that than we do the actual overthrows he okayed. We will play an excerpt of that speech now.
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Sure, you heard that term before.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Nice sentiment, Ike, but too little too late, huh? Allen Dulles was looking towards the future. He knew his boy Richard Nixon was going to run for president because he was already Eisenhower's vice. But another young guy was coming up. John F. Kennedy. He had met him once at Joe Kennedy's house, you know, because these rich families kind of know each other. And he met the young man lying on his back from pain. That's the thing, we found out that John had like a disease. Like he was in pain all the time. So he met him lying on his back. And oddly enough, Dulles, last time he saw him, was on his back. So that was the Dulles Imperium. But what does the Dulles legacy tell us? But of course, Dulles knew he's a strange genius. Kennedy is going to need him in the CIA. But what he wasn't banking on was the young guy wasn't taking any of his shit. When darkness comes back, the end of Allen Dulles. The hour is also sponsored by Nathaniel's Firearms. Nathaniel, what a cool guy. He owns a firearms shop on 37 Smith Avenue. Real cool dude. Typically, I wouldn't take this kind of sponsorship considering Nathaniel's in a bit of trouble. He's been putting up some unpopular stuff on his socials, some questionable stuff on his socials, and I think you know what I'm talking about, Nathaniel. You kind of might want to take some of those images down. Some of those memes might be offensive. I'm not one to tell someone how to live, but to be honest, you know you shouldn't be talking about that, about those people. Nathaniel Firearms is a great gun to have, especially when you're waiting for those CIA agents to break down your door, because you know they're coming. You made some jokes, you said a few things on record you probably shouldn't have. You have a few political beliefs that might be considered un-American. They're going to get you eventually. They're watching you right now. So why not have Nathaniel's Firearm? Why not be ready to take down at least two, 3 agents, you know? Small squad. Unless they think you're really dangerous, then they give you about 2 squads. But maybe you're just one individual guy. And they're like, he's more of an intelligence guy than he is a firearm guy. But they don't know that. And bam, bam, bam. Now you're on the run from a intelligence agency. These are things that can happen when you own a Nathaniel's Firearm. Nathaniel's a good dude when he wants to be, but he's got to take down those posts. Nathaniel, I will not read another goddamn thing for you or promote you again until you take down the goddamn post. You know? They haven't busted down the door yet. Maybe we'll get away with this one. You think? Why aren't you drinking this whiskey, man? We're about to fucking die. We're talking about CIA secrets here. Oh, now you're a 19-year-old intern? Okay, you weren't a 19-year-old intern when you were rolling that joint for me the other day. Better drink up this goddamn Skull Crusher whiskey. It's game over after today. It was the 60s. Kennedy was president. And, well, that old Dulles was up to his bullshit. That's what Dulles kind of did. Bullshit. But Cuba was now the next hot button one because they were in the midst of a revolution. Now, the CIA knew there was money to be made in Cuba. The Mafia knew there was money to be made in Cuba. And it's kind of interesting how the CIA and the Mafia both wanted to get rid of Fidel Castro so much. They worked together. Several attempts didn't go well. But, you know, you can't blame two groups for trying. They were trying to get the cash. Who doesn't want the cash? And Cuba asked the question, could a country have its own resources? Well, they kind of do, I guess. I think people get a fair share of it. It looked really cool in Fast and the Furious 7. Was that 7 or 8? But Cuba was an issue so much that Eisenhower, even though giving a delightful speech about the military-industrial complex, told Kennedy, hey, I drew up a plan called the Bay of Pigs, bruh. And you know what? I was thinking, how about you be the one that do it? You do it. Join me on this, man. Be like us. Be cool, man. Overthrow a government. It was peer pressure. And Kennedy did not like peer pressure. Even Dulles was like, hey, man, listen. I when I was pitching Guatemala, it looked a little, it didn't look like we were going to win. It looked harder than it seemed. But I'm telling you, this Cuban one looks way better than Guatemala. It's going to be easy. Let's do it. Come on. Don't be a pussy, bro. This is how American government works. This is how the American imperialism works. You fucking expand. Don't be a little fucking bitch and invade Cuba. That was not word for word what Alan Dulles said, but I imagine it went a little something like that. By this time, John Foster had died of cancer, so Alan was kind of on his own. The Bay of Pigs was a simple two crew invasion. You train your rebels in Central America, you give them a beach landing into the Bay of Pigs, but they gotta have air support. We don't know who that air support is, but you gotta give air support. Kennedy liked the idea because it was a less noisy invasion. He didn't really want a loud invasion. He didn't want to be known as an imperialist. He just wanted to liberate some people. And Alan, by this time, really didn't like John because John didn't really like him. They both disagreed on what America's place was in the world. So he kind of wanted to see him fuck up to the point where the people who were assigned to the Bay of Pigs weren't even like the A-list guys. Like, Alan wasn't even running with Pippin and Rodman. He was running with Kwame Brown. Kwame Brown was in charge of the fucking Bay of Pigs. It didn't go well. And Kennedy, seeing it wasn't going well, didn't go for the airstrikes. People often wonder what went wrong. People always say it was the airstrikes. If he had just ordered the airstrikes, everything would have been fine. But Alan Dulles wasn't even in the building when this Bay of Pigs was going on. He was conveniently in Puerto Rico, giving a speech to the Young President's Convention. People realized that Alan had tanked the Bay of Pigs on purpose because he wanted a real big invasion. Because this one was in our backyard. You know, the Russians had finally overstepped. The communism had already reached. It's too close to the door. It's our next door fucking neighbor. This guy's dog is shitting everywhere. Trying to put an end to this fucking dog and the dog owner. But Kennedy didn't see it that way. Kennedy did not want to be an imperialist. And Alan figured if I tank the Bay of Pigs, maybe he'll be into it. But Kennedy wasn't, even then. Kennedy was so embarrassed by it that heads had to fall. You gotta get rid of some people. And Alan, knowing that it was probably coming for him, was already spinning his media friends like the Washington Post and New York Times to go, hey, it's a Kennedy problem. He fucked this up, not me. Not me. Okay, I wasn't even there. Don't ask me why I wasn't there. But I wasn't even there. That was all John. That was not me. I'm a good CIA chief. Kennedy fired his ass. And boy, was he pissed because they had just finished building a new CIA home in Langley that he'll never get to be in the office suite he helped design. He was fired just before getting there. But the building was kind of called the Alan Dulles Mausoleum Memorial. So, hey, you know, he got something out of it. And the problem with the situation was even if you fired Alan, all his boys were still in there. He got those guys those jobs. He built them up. McCone wasn't no fucking change. He was just a fucking Dulles acolyte. Angleton was still there. Wisner was still there. They were still keeping the Dulles Imperium alive. And he was still an active person in Washington. Hell, even one young congressman had him speak at a party. His name was Donald Rumsfeld. He too had a very Calvinist fucking view about foreign policy, huh? Prescott Bush, huge friends with Alan Dulles. What do you think they talked about? Which he then told his sons about. and their grandsons about. Allen Dulles is the focal point of all this stuff. But Allen on the outside he still had a lot of control over the Pentagon and the CIA, which then bred the poisonous atmosphere, which some would say led to the end of Kennedy's life. You know what, dude? It's a story. Let me run to my office real quick and grab the book. To be fair, I would like to give Allen a chance to speak on his own behalf, at least to explain his logic and how he approached things. This is from a special called The Science of Spying. Here is Allen Dulles.
For many years, its scholarly headmaster was a super spy in the classic mold named Allen Dulles.
Intelligence is nothing really other than information and knowledge. For the days of Socrates, by various methods, and even before that, mankind has been seeking knowledge of everything that influences his own life or the life of the nation to which he belongs. But the idea that it is necessarily nefarious, it's always engaged in overthrowing governments, that's false. That's for the birds. Now, there are times when the United States government feels that the developments in another government, such as in the Vietnam situation, is of a nature to imperil the safety and the security and the peace of the world, and ask the Central Intelligence Agency to be its agent in that particular situation.
Mr. Dulles, I know you've heard this many times, that there are people who say that we, with regard to the CIA, are waging a secret war with an invisible government.
We are obviously engaged in many facets of what is generally called the Cold War, which the communist policy is forced upon us. No use denying that. That's a fact of life. But may I say this, and I do it with all solemnity. At no time has the CIA engaged in any political activity or any intelligence activity that was not approved at the highest level.
Do the Russians have a CIA?
The KGB is one of the most sinister organizations that ever was organized.
Are they any good? Are the Russians good at this?
Oh, yes. Oh, my, yes. You take some of their operations, they're classic. And when we lost Czechoslovakia, that was a classic operation. You take their operation in Cuba, great skill was shown in that. You take several of the things they're working on now, such as Indonesia's, the Sudan, and so forth and so on, because they have a marvelous apparatus.
Do they spend more money than we do in these activities?
Oh, they must.
Do we have an application of morality in our activities they don't?
Oh, far more than they do, yes.
Could you talk on that subject?
Well, only that, as far as I know, we don't engage in assassinations and kidnappings and things of that kind. As far as I know, we never have. As far as we know, they have, and done it quite consistently.
Did you apply, for example, moral standards to what you did when you were director of the CIA?
Yes, I did. Why? Because I don't think, given the caliber of the men and women I had working for me, I didn't want to ask them to do a thing that I wouldn't do. One or two said that even what I assigned them, they preferred not to do. That was all right with me. I didn't ask them to do it. All I can say is that I'm a parson's son, and I was brought up as a Presbyterian. Maybe as a Calvinist. Maybe that made me a fatalist. I don't know. But I hope I have a reasonable moral standard.
Okay. Evan, I don't read out loud very well. Some would say that makes me illiterate. Maybe I am a little fucking illiterate, but I'm real fucking smart. This is a little nerve-wracking. Okay. The summer of 1963, Peter Dale Scott, a young English literature professor, see, it's already fucking up, at the University of California's Berkeley campus, found himself in the thick of an anti-Kennedy firmament. Scott, the son of a distinguished Canadian poet, F.R. Scott, a mentor of Leonard Cohen, had served as a Canadian diplomat to Poland. Much of his social life, when he arrived in Berkeley, revolved around passionately anti-Soviet Polish emigres? Is that the word for a party? One day, a former Polish army colonel who had befriended Scott invited him to a dinner party at the Palo Alto home of W. Glenn Campbell, the intellectual entrepreneur who built Stanford's Hoover Institution into a leading center of conservative resurgence in America. Fucking conservatives. At Campbell's home that evening, the conversation among the 16 or so guests soon grew heated as it turned to demand the White House. Quotation. In those days, I was not very active politically, but I was amazed, even shocked at how reactionary the conversation became around the dinner table, Scott later recalled. Most of the talk focused on the danger presented to the nation by its aberrant, maybe I do know some words, its aberrant president, John F. Kennedy. His failure to dispose Castro, especially during the missile crisis, may have been one of the chief complaints, but it was by no means only one. The complaints threatened to drag on forever until one man spoke with authority. I'm not sure, but he may have even stood up to do so. The striking figure who commanded the group's attention was a Russian Orthodox priest in a dark cassock with a crucifix around his neck. He spoke quietly, but with confidence, assuring the group that they had no need to worry. The old man will take care of it, he said simply. At the time, Scott assumed the priest was referring to old Joe Kennedy, who presumably could be counted on to set his son straight. But by 1963, the Kennedy patriarch was confined to a wheelchair after suffering a massive stroke in 1961. That left him severely debilitated. When words just don't stay on the line, they get me every time. It was not until years later that Scott realized the Russian priest was more likely referring to someone else. By then, the Berkeley professor was a respected dean of the JFK assassination research community and devoted years to studying the political forces surrounding the president's murder. In a conversation with a fellow Kennedy researcher, one day, Scott was reminded by the nickname by which Allen Dulles was affectionately known for in intelligence circles, the old man. The Kennedy assassination is a very big topic, one that we will cover on this show, and we will cover Allen Dulles' involvement in a supposed conspiracy. But if we can end tonight on an important note, my favorite part of the Devil's Chessboard is actually the last page, because it kind of sums up Allen Dulles' life, and I encourage you to go out and find this book. It's one of my favorites, and I think you'll enjoy it too. The way David Talbot does Allen Dulles' life, he writes it like a spy novel. It's sprawling, but you're getting all these core details of who this man is and what his work was. There were some, James Jesus Angleton. These were some of James Jesus Angleton's dying words. He delivered them between fits of calamitous coughing, lung-scraping seizures that still failed to break him of a cigarette habit, and soothing sips of tea. Fundamentally, the founding fathers of U.S. intelligence were liars, Angleton told Trento in an emotionless voice. The better you lied, and the more you betrayed, the more likely you were promoted. Outside their duplicity, the only thing they had in common was a desire for absolute power. I did things that, in looking back on my life, I regret. But I was part of it, and I loved being part of it. He invoked the names of the high eminences who had run the CIA in his day. Dulles, Helms, Wisner. These men were grand masters, he said. If you were in a room with them, you were in a room full of people that you had to believe would deservedly end up in hell. Angleton took another sip of his steaming cup, and I guess I will see them there soon. Maybe this episode will reach the right people, and maybe we can change how things are done in this country. But then again, I think we all know how this one is going to end.